I wrote this paper, Securing the South Pacific, Making the Most of Australia's Renewed Security Focus on the Region, on about the 10th anniversary of the Ramsay deployment, and in the wake of the new Defence White Paper identifying stabilising and securing the South Pacific and East Timor as one of just two priorities we're going to base the Australian Defence Force around. So that's great news, obviously, for a Pacific watcher such as myself, and makes a lot of sense for Australia with our forces coming out of Afghanistan. We need something, a sensible paradigm to prioritise the ADF, and so the two things, the defence of Australia directly and the very likely contingencies in the South Pacific, provide a good basis for doing that. So even though that's obviously to be welcomed, my paper argues that it's actually getting harder. That's for a range of reasons. The most important one, I guess, is that it's the South Pacific is a more congested region with China's growing economic clout and, to some extent, diplomatic clout. That makes our neighbours, gives them the feeling they've got new options for and new styles and new approaches for the way they do business. Some of the countries are also growing economically quite quickly, so you've seen in Timor-Leste have been able to politely decline some of the things we've suggested they help us with recently. And just the intractability of some of the challenges faced in the region themselves, the very things that make us interested in the region's security and stability, make it harder to help them. So there are a range of reasons why our increasing interest in helping, our interest in exercising leadership may not be met with what Graham de Bell calls the regional countries' fellowship. So the paper sets out 10 recommendations for just ways we can, if we're going to focus seriously on South Pacific security, 10 ways we can avoid some of the pitfalls that were made last time we really focused on it in what was called the more interventionist approach that we saw after September 11 and the Bali bombings. So there was an approach from 2003 to 2007 which achieved a lot in many ways. We doubled Australia's aid to the region and figured out how to target it much better. Many things were achieved. Ramsay stabilised the Solomon Islands, which was to all extents a failing and very near failed state. So in some ways there was a lot to be proud of there, but by the end of that period none of our neighbours were talking to us. Essentially relations were so strained that the follow-on things we need to do in our security cooperation just weren't working. And in Timor-Leste and in the Solomon Islands in 2006 we had bad security problems, came out of the blue to us to some extent, and we had things like the Moti affair in Papua New Guinea and the ECP being kicked out of Papua New Guinea by the Papua New Guinea Supreme Court that really soured relations. So if we're going to go in and try and really focus on stabilising and securing the Pacific for the potential trouble to come, there are 10 things we can do to help. The report puts forward 10 recommendations for our partnership with regional countries across the board. I thought rather than look at all 10, I'd focus very quickly on 3 of the key ones as Prime Minister Rudd prepares to visit Port Moresby next week. Firstly, our investment in defence in Papua New Guinea has not been matched by our investment in policing in recent years. There have been calls in PNG, there are regularly calls to increase the PNGDF to 10,000 soldiers. In my opinion, PNG doesn't need 10,000 soldiers, and most certainly needs 10,000 police. and it needs good police, and Australia needs to help there. Our investment has been falling, and that's a key area that needs to rise. Second thing I'd urge Prime Minister Rudd to think about would be the enhanced defence cooperation with the PNGDF. The PNGDF came out of the Bougainville experience and Sandline crisis bruised and battered, and was a force in real trouble. But in the constitutional crisis from 2011 to 2012, and in the subsequent elections, it's really proved itself that it's matured a great deal, and it can be a great security partner for Australia rather than a strategic liability. The Prime Minister Gillard, as she was, signed a defence cooperation arrangement with Papua New Guinea, setting out a very useful forward program of work, and I'd urge Prime Minister Rudd to take that up and discuss that with Prime Minister O'Neill. Thirdly, the Pacific Patrol Boat Program, which has put 22 patrol boats out into our Forum Island neighbouring countries and has ADF, mainly Navy people out there supporting it, and been enormously useful as coming to the end of its natural life. The first boats will come out of service about 2019. There's a follow-on program called the PMSP, the Pacific Maritime Security Program, which will create a more sophisticated maritime network, but it's currently unfunded in the forward estimates. That's a vital program that is in our neighbours' security interests. Our neighbours lose well over $1 billion a year to unregulated fishing. But it's also in our national interest in that our presence, which is highly welcome in the region with the patrol boat program, creates a permanent presence right throughout this region, encompassing a quarter of the world's ocean, that gives us enormous reach and awareness of what's going on. So thinking about the regional security as we head into the 10th anniversary of Ramsay, the three big regional stabilisation missions, the military components anyway, have finished in Solomon Islands, in Timor-Leste in March, and in Bougainville nearly 10 years ago. So in some ways you could say, well, isn't it all over? Sadly it's not, and the South Pacific, sitting across our vital lines of communication, will always be of vital strategic significance to Australia, and the recent white paper repeats its predecessor's statement that it's vital that we don't have any potentially hostile power establishing bases in our near approaches. More importantly, we've got what Graham Dobell refers to as a sort of de facto regional security to the region now. And the region, while it's looking quite stable at the moment, and there are a whole range of reasons to be optimistic about the region, contains a range of intractable and very complex challenges that aren't going to go away anytime soon. So it's vital that we be able to operate in our regional countries with our regional partners to make it a combined effort.